Gaming Bolt presents 15 worst things EA has ever done. Never forgive, never forget. You don't really get voted into the worst company of America twice for no reason. Whether you enjoy their games despite the publisher behind them or not, it's taken more and more mental gymnastics over the years to really understand the logic behind some of the most horrible things Electronic Arts has ever done to the industry itself, the people who work for them, and the gamers who play their creations. EA seems to act based on the short attention span and memory of the internet, but Gaming Bolt hasn't forgotten. Gaming Bolt hasn't forgiven. Mass Effect Andromeda blunder. When you have what is essentially the most well-known, respected, and loved sci-fi series of the last generation under your belt and need to take it into the next generation, you should probably do all you can to make sure that the series is continued in a way that respects that legacy, right? Well, the story of what went so terribly wrong with Mass Effect Andromeda is a long one of ambition, mismanagement, politics, and tech within BioWare. It was ultimately Electronic Arts who pushed the game out the door anyways, and then shelved the series indeterminately while splitting up the development team in the process. Killing Visceral Games. It was a dark time for the Force when Visceral Games, the Battlefield Hardline and Dead Space developers, were hard at work on a single-player, story-driven adventure title set in the Star Wars universe, and it looked just awesome. Players were excited about their Uncharted in a galaxy far, far away, or at least they were until EA swooped in and shut all of that down. Patrick Soderlund citing in a blog post fundamental shifts in the marketplace and player feedback, but the reality felt a lot closer to them closing down the whole studio for daring to not include loot boxes, but more on that later. EA, the killer of studios. While we just took a moment to shine a spotlight on Visceral Games, there's more than a few studios that we've said goodbye to over the years thanks to EA. When Mass Effect Andromeda went in the only obvious direction, and bombed horribly, there was a very real fear that meant the end of BioWare itself. Something that isn't without precedent, as Electronic Arts has a well-known history of buying studios and shuttering them when they don't perform to absurd expectations. Let's all take a moment to collectively pour one out for legendary development studios Bullfrog, Westwood, Origin Systems, NewFX, Pandemic, Playfish, Blackbox, DreamWorks Interactive, Phenomic, Victory, Mythic, Maxis, Headgate, and of course, Visceral. Star Wars Battlefront and carving out content. Star Wars Battlefront was a huge series just 2 generations prior on the PS2, Xbox, and PC, with the huge team shooter standing alongside the BioWare Knights of the Old Republic games as what some would consider to be the golden age of Star Wars games. So when Electronic Arts had the rights to Star Wars and revived the Battlefront series, there were some clear expectations to meet. What eventually came out was a rather poor, content-lacking, online-only Battlefield skinned with stormtroopers in order to launch around Episode 7. The follow-up title was supposed to be an apology for how this game launched. Supposed to be. FIFA 2018 free-to-play mechanics. While EA did get a lot of grief for their inclusion of predatory microtransactions in another game, for some reason they seem to get away with it with their popular FIFA series year after year. The random picks out of the Ultimate Team packs that players build their teams from in FIFA 2018 and several previous iterations are completely down to random luck, leaving players struggling behind playing thousands of hours to grind up or dropping thousands of dollars with no promise of getting anything better at all. Reddit users have complained that players have dropped over $8,000 to get a perfect team and a huge head start for the competitive mode. They've done similar things in NFL, NHL, NBA Live, and UFC 3, all while never seeing the same kind of uproar that another title saw. EA Overtime Lawsuit. Back in 2004, 2 simultaneous lawsuits hit Electronic Arts thanks to Jamie Kirschenbaum and Leander Hasty, both representing artists and engineers respectively who had been working on projects for EA without seeing owed overtime pay. The story would have ended there and been of little note if not for a blog post from a rather annoyed wife who tore into the company over the treatment of their employees, which it's hard to think has gotten any better with time. The spouse, who would later be revealed as the wife of Hasty, Nicole Wong, called out the company for being like a prison and a money farm, with forced 13-hour days, 6 days a week, and time off for good behavior. Hasty's lawsuit would be settled to the sweet tune of $14.9 million US. SimCity online-only connection. Similar to an earlier entry, EA's revival of a classic series was unfortunately saddled with some unfortunate garbage that hampered the enjoyment of the die-hard players. According to Electronic Arts, the online-only forced connection that even solo players had to partake in had a purpose. Outwardly, they said that it had to do with the vision of the connected world experience, and with offloading computations to the cloud, which might have been easier to swallow had players not poked and prodded the game until they found out that the connection requirements did nothing for the game beyond enforced DRM. Much later, after they thought everyone had forgotten, EA themselves removed it. Need for Speed 2015 Always Online. Similarly, though not quite as gloriously debunked, the long-awaited Need for Speed reboot was sworn by Ghost Games to just need to be online at all times, because they built the game around the autolog and social interactions with your friends. It just needed to be that way for EA to deliver on what the fans wanted. Well, if the follow-up Need for Speed Payback was any indication, it turns out that the fans wanted the ability to pause the game for a bathroom break. Forced multiplayer. While the forced online connections and another later entry came out of EA running away with ideas to combat piracy to the detriment of everything else, Electronic Arts also forced in multiplayer competitive and cooperative elements into games that had absolutely no business being multiplayer. It was EA terribly misreading the industry shifting towards a focus on multiplayer with games like Mass Effect 3 and Dead Space 3 finding precious development time spent on things nobody asked for, like competitive multiplayer modes and adding a co-op adventure into a horror series. The games found themselves worse for the effort. Need for Speed Payback. As noted earlier, the 2015 Need for Speed reboot was a complete disappointment, so it was obvious that Need for Speed Payback had to deliver. Unfortunately, it turned out to be one of the worst games of 2017 thanks to boring characters, a bland story, and racing mechanics that lacked variety. We're not sure what will happen to the Need for Speed series, but we're pretty sure that the series has lost its charm. Dungeon Keeper Mobile. Let's assume Command & Conquer Rivals doesn't exist, but this, the true face of evil, Dungeon Keeper, was a classic Bullfrog series that Electronic Arts got their greedy hands on and proceeded to destroy it in not overly unique ways. Pushing the very limits of decency within mobile gaming space, Dungeon Keeper Mobile showed the truly unpleasant side of a free-to-play business model, making players wait for upwards of 24 hours at a time to dig out a single block of their dungeon, or pay real money to actually play the game. When this rightfully infuriated fans, EA Mobile tried to squash reviews on the Google Play Store below 4 stars and brought the Streisand effect into full force. Monopolizing sports games with very little innovation with each entry. The first rule of capitalism, competition is good for the consumer, meaning that while EA can't exactly keep anyone else from making a football game, they can keep the NFL teams all to themselves and thus control a huge reason of why people play sports games in the first place. Because they know this, we haven't had sports games take on common sense additions in the age of the internet, like DLC roster updates, while they make major polish or changes between full entries. EA knows that they can just keep selling slightly different games every year, and players will follow along with each season regardless. EA Online Pass. While it wasn't EA that came up with the Online Pass, they sure did run away with it to a frankly an insane degree. What EA called Project $10 was a hugely transparent strong-arming of players who dared exercise their consumer right to purchase a product secondhand, locking them out of key features of the game, usually online play. Though it was possible to lock single-player content away, such as when EA published Kingdoms of Amalur: Reckoning, locking away a 7-part quest behind their code, providing a slippery slope that they were. EA eventually removed them from all of their games in 2013, around the same time there was serious consideration around the Xbox One doing that job for them, while also responding to pressure. Dead Space's death. Dead Space 2 was riding high around launch, as a great update to the original game and one of the few series of the Xbox 360 and PS3 generation still carrying the survival horror torch. But then the Dead Space series fell victim to the aforementioned multiplayer crowbarring by executives that had no clue what they were doing, leaving fans of the horror series asking themselves, why? And EA deciding that maybe story-driven games are dead and canceling the series forever, tragically missing the entire point. Star Wars Battlefront 2 and LOOTGATE. Oh boy, you all knew that this entry had to be at the top of the list. Way back on this list, we discussed the original Star Wars Battlefront EA being bungled by rushing to meet the deadline of the film, and many things about Star Wars Battlefront 2 were supposed to be done as atonement for missing features of the first title. Sure, this game had single-player mode, and maps were no longer DLC that split the community, but the microtransactions in the game giving out boosting star cards that gave a very tangible boost to players who ponied up was never something the fans requested. The resulting storm of feedback was legendary, with the few meek attempts to justify themselves with pride and accomplishment beaten down roundly, downvoted into the most hated comment of all time on Reddit, and transcending to meme status. The huge wave of backlash from the player base saw Disney get involved, forcing Electronic Arts to disable the microtransactions. Even then, the game saw enough coverage to see countries the world over having to take a look at legislating the industry over loot boxes. LOOTGATE will stand as the legendary bullshit that it is, a monument to how not to run a game, and a warning to those who would follow. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from Gaming Bolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.